I want to be as practical as possible with you because that's what they've asked us to do. And my name is Mark. I run a church called Village Church, which is a multi-campus church. So we have 4 campuses, and we were planted out of a church. And so they specifically want to answer this question. I'm a pastor considering multi-site. You've done it. What lessons have you learned? And so that's specifically what I'm going to zone in on and try to be as practical as possible. These are random thoughts. They're not in any particular order. And so the point is to be able to inspire or inform you if you're considering planting a church, multiplying in any kind of context. So it's very specific. So hopefully it is relevant to most of the people in the room in regard to what you're doing in ministry. So the first thing is, again, no particular order. Write these down and I'll just comment on them. First thing is, Simon Sinek said start with why, right? You don't know anything about your life or your mission or your vision in the world or your place in the world unless you answer the question why. Why am I getting up in the morning? Why do I have this job? Why am I in this marriage? You have to figure out what the why is for your life, your organization, your ministry. And if you don't understand the why, then you're not going to be driven to do anything. And you're also not going to get through things when they're really tough. And so the question of your church, why would I plant a church? Why would I reproduce? Why would I go multi-site or plant a Thomas church? What's the point? The point has to be to reach more people. The point has to be the advancement of the gospel, as Paul says in Philippians 1. The point has to be Jesus, not I want to be a multi-site church, because that's a cool thing to say when I'm hanging out with other pastors. That, my other campus, whatever, my campus pastor says. All right, it becomes like a cool thing to do. That should not be your reason. Your reason is things are already going well. You want to reproduce health. You don't want to, if your church sucks, don't reproduce it a bunch. Then you just have reproduction of sucky stuff. All right? Don't do that. Get your stuff figured out first. Be good. Be good at what you do. Be effective. Preach the Bible well. Lead people to Jesus. If nobody's come to your, no one new's come to your church in 15 years, and you haven't baptized anyone, and no one's come to Christ, don't in your half-empty room. Don't go, I think we should be multi-site. Right? You got to begin to say, okay, we got to reproduce health. We have to take what's healthy right here and actually extend it out somewhere else, and you have to be driven by urgency to do that, because people are going to push back and say this isn't a good idea. I was just talking to someone, and they're working through right now, because we do video. I'll tell you what our model is, just so you understand the framework and the backdrop. We have 4 different sites. And they're all video sermons from the week before. So I used to preach 3 or 4 times on a Sunday. I was getting a little tired. Those of you who preach know. And so we preach 8 o'clock. I preach 1 time, and then that video is shown at all the different sites, at all the different services. And I'm freed up to go and actually be in the foyer and pastor people and love people and shake hands and kiss babies and do all that good stuff that good pastors do. And so I'm freed up to do that now, whereas before I couldn't. And so we preach 8 o'clock in the morning, and then everything runs video. And so that's the kind of model, and people push back against that. And I've been talking to a few pastors, and they're like, I'm really trying to figure out if video is right. Is it wrong or right? Because this theologian says it's fundamentally wrong. And I'm like, good point. What Bible verse was that again? What was that? Ephesians what? Says video is wrong. It's sinful. It's bad. What? Oh, right. There's not that verse. Because the Great Commission goes, hey, here's what I want you to do. Make disciples, but notice Jesus doesn't say how. He doesn't give you a methodology. He just says, do it. Baptize people, teach them. The difficult part is teach them to observe all that I commanded you, right? That's the hard part, because it's much easier to just teach people what he commanded us and get them to repeat it back to us. And so it's talk like this. Okay, I love Jesus, love the Lord with all your... Okay, good, I made a disciple. The problem is teach them to observe all that I commanded you. That's tough. And you know what that needs, we found, is... So we do video, and people say, well, what about video? And so what we actually had to do was we said, because here's what I think the church needs to figure out. And I was talking about this in our breakout before this, is the church has to figure out what mission, Alan Hirsch says this, and you can agree or disagree and fight about this over coffee. He says, don't think church, think mission. Don't think church, think mission, which means, when you're talking about Christology and ecclesiology and missiology, he would argue that missiology should come before ecclesiology, and we need to structure the church to serve the mission, not the other way around, and so on and so forth. And people can debate that depending on your tradition. But the point is you got to ask the question, do we have Jesus right? Do we have are we preaching the Bible? Are we actually preaching the gospel? Like, if you haven't talked about the death and resurrection of Jesus, it's not a sermon yet. It's not a church yet. If you haven't talked about Jesus on the cross, dying for sin, taking on the wrath of God, you are actually sinful. You're not okay. This is Canada, right? So everyone's told no one's going to go for this. You just need to kind of talk in pear-shaped tones and be like, hey, you have ideas, I have ideas, we all have ideas. Everybody's fine. We're all fine. We're all together. And I'm just teaching you. We're just dialoguing about life. You're fine. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Sorry. Right? That's what people say is what you should do in Canada. But if you haven't got up and told people you're a wreck, you're depraved, you're sinful, Jesus was Jesus for you, took on sin, took on the wrath of God, and he didn't just stay dead, he rose again. Now he can empower you into life and mission. If you haven't said that, it's not a sermon yet, and it's not a church yet. And so this gospel thing needs to be very, straightforward in your mind. And then you think about methodology as a secondary thing. That might work, this might work, that might work, okay? What do we got to do? And so for our situation, we came out of a church, very generous church. It was about 300 or 400 people at the time. And I said I felt called to plant a church. And they said, okay. And they gave us 35 people in our blessing. And we held on to, we were, together for about 3 years. And then we kind of grew into autonomy. And it was a great kind of symmetry and great model for here's what the family's going to do. We're going to bless you to go out and plant a church to reach people. But the bottom line was there was health. There was a mission. We were focused on what we were trying to do. And so what we stumbled into video, not because that was the goal. Methodology is always serving the mission. And so video for us wasn't the goal. It was the vehicle to get to the goal, which is reaching more people for Jesus. That's why Jesus came, to seek and save what? The lost. That's your job every day. So we said, we don't care what people think. We don't care if people try to tell us something's wrong or right. If there's no Bible verse for it, then we're going to go forward and do what we can with the time we've been given, because every day people die and go to hell like my father. Every single day people die and go to hell. And so we don't have time to sit in back rooms and hang out with pastors and debate all these little nuances. We got a mission in front of us and there's an urgency, so let's go. And so that's what we did. So video we stumbled into it because there was no room. We had all these people. We couldn't fit anybody else anymore, so we just hived off a bunch and threw them in a different city and said, you're coming from this city anyway, now you attend this church. And so the multi-site thing for us was a way to leverage what we had, leverage the resources that we had to be able to say, okay, we already have 1,000 people coming from this place. Let's just plant the church there. So we planted a church 20 minutes from where we were gathering, and day one, it was 1,000 people. Now, who do you put in charge of that? A leader. And this is the issue, is we need to be able to do multi-site. It's based on, can you develop leaders? Can you develop, because we have a bigger appetite right now as Village Church than we have leaders, than we have capacity for. And so the reality is you got to be able to develop and train up leaders who can actually take these people and lead them. And so people say, yeah, but you're on video, so everyone looks at you and they think that's not true. This is one of the things I think the church needs to figure out in the next 20 or 30 years. I was reading something the other day and it pointed this out. It said, Bitcoin is the largest bank in the world, and it doesn't own any money. Uber is the biggest taxi company in the world, and it doesn't own a single car. And it went through Airbnb, Alibaba, all these different things. There's a new way in the world. And if the church doesn't figure out how to do things differently, in the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to be dinosaurs. If we're all sitting around still talking about whether video is godly, we're done. Wake up. What are you even talking about? If you're in a room this big, usually, look, what, you're all right. What? You're watching it. What are you talking about? Vanderstelt's not going to get up after me and totally debunk all this, is he? Okay, good. All right. You know, because he's all about like people. Develop everyone, love everyone. All right, so what's my point? My point is, who are the people who are going to lead these things? It's not me. Here's what we need to figure out. We've got to figure out, so you know APES, apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, Ephesians 4. These leaders are out there. These roles are out there. But here's what we got to figure out. If you're going to wait to find the traditional Lone Ranger church planter, who's a beautiful mix of APE, right? Apostolic, prophet, evangelist. And they got to be able to lead people, and people will fall into the gates of hell. They got to preach the best sermons. They got to be entrepreneurship. They got to be able to do money and fundraise and lead staff, of course, because it's all about, you got to do all these things. Those guys are unicorns. If you're going to wait to find that guy, you won't plant. Because they're so rare. So here's what we got to figure out. In the new normal, you know, prophet, priest, king? What we're finding out is in multi-site, if you can leverage teaching staff, whether that's video or not, I'm not pushing videos, but video or not, you can take people who are good good priests and good kings, and they can lead sites. I know people, it's because it's a leadership gift. It's not a preaching gift. The age-old traditional model of church planting is the guy's got to be able to preach. And if he can't preach, okay, for instance, the guy who was selling coffee beans up here, okay, entrepreneur, goes, well, I can't plant a church. Why not? Who says? Well, I don't have theological training. I'm not a preacher. Preaching's taken care of. What can you do? People follow you. You're entrepreneur. You stick people in relationship. You can shepherd them. We've got to figure this out in the next 20, 30 years. You can leverage kings and priests to plant campuses everywhere if you leverage technology. But we're afraid to leverage technology. You know what Neil Postman, amusing ourselves to death, 1984 wrote? He said, do you know who wins elections? Every single time the president is selected by the person who leveraged the technology the best. And come on, who leveraged technology more, Trump or Hillary Clinton? Clinton was in a back room somewhere. We never even saw her. And Trump's on TV every day. Pump. We got to use technology. We got to figure it out. Postman says, here's who wins. People who leverage technology. Church is scared of technology. That's not going to work. But when I show up at those campuses, because here's the classic pushback. Oh, then what if you get hit by a bus? Doesn't matter if I get hit by a bus. Because we've recorded sermons for 2.5 years. No, I'm just kidding. No, here's why. Listen, I have six minutes. They said 20 minutes. Listen, one of my staff looked at me one time and said, you open your mouth and 10 minutes falls out. All right, so here's the thing. So when I show up to these campuses, you know who they go to? Not me. They go to the campus pastor because that's who they care about. That's who cares for them 7 days a week, not for 40 minutes on a Sunday. The job of a pastor and a leader isn't preaching. That's the classic model. Leader equals preacher. False. There's great preachers who are bad leaders and great leaders who can't preach a lick. Use them. Because what this model does is it says, man, I could take someone out of the business world, boom, campus pastor. Because they can shepherd and lead people. We got to figure this out in the net. If we keep going back to the age-old, but do you have an MDiv? We're done. All right, point 2. Okay. Which one do I choose? Okay. Do you do, do you do kind of okay, this was one of the questions Mark said he wanted me to answer. So do you do kind of classic church planting where you plant autonomous churches, or do you do multi-site where they stay connected to your church? And I think you do both. We have an appetite to be able to plant autonomous churches that have nothing to do with Village Church in the next bunch of years. And we want to be able to leverage technology and plant what God is, because we only have so much time. You only have so much time and so much money and so much energy. You have to take it and say, what has God given me to do? What's working right now? We know it's gospel-centered. And so what's working? Okay, if this is working, let's push in because time is short. And I want to try to leverage this as much as possible because the parable of talents says, Jesus gave me $5. And what did you do with it to make 10? Did you bury it? Did you say, I don't know, I was afraid a pastor might make fun of me, so I didn't want to do this, whatever. And so that's not what I asked you to do. I want you to steward this money I gave you and multiply it. Okay, fine. Let's do that to the best of our ability and do our best to do that. Now, when we're trying to do that, we've got to understand that God has given you a moment, and how are you going to leverage it? Are you going to do multi-site, or are you going to do autonomous church plants? Do both. But the biggest challenge you're going to face is developing and training up leaders. That's the biggest thing we face. To plant autonomous churches, you need to find people who can do all of those roles and do them well. To do multi-site, you got to be able to have a different skill set. I think you should do both. It's not either or. It's what is that scenario? Now, one of the challenges that we're facing right now, and they asked this in Q&A in our breakout, was what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now? One of the biggest challenges is how do you do multi-site and yet make that site hungry? It's like anything, right? It's like, how do you make them hungry enough, because you're not just pouring all your money and time and resource and they say everything's paid for. So let me tell you a mistake we made, because Mark said share a mistake. We've made a lot of mistakes. One of the mistakes we've probably made is when we launched Calgary in September, we probably put it in too nice a venue. The venue we put it in was similar to this. It actually looks like this. And we pay a lot of money for that, to be able to launch as big as possible and as nice as possible. And going backwards, what I'm finding is that people aren't hungry. Like they're not like, because what the message that sends is someone's taking care of this. So they never went through those years where they got to scratch and scrounge and figure it all out monetarily. They got to step up and be on mission. So we're getting up and we're saying, guys, if you don't step up and serve, what are you doing? Sitting at Village Church and being a non-contributing zero doesn't work. You have to step up and serve and give, or get out of here. You're taking up a seat. Now, here's the other thing. Understand, start with why. One of the big things that we have, the blessing that we have, is get your staff on board with the vision and the mission of the church to be multi-site or a church planting church. If your staff isn't on board, it's not going to work. Our staff, right down to the secretary, is on board with multi-site and understands this is why we have to get here early. This is why we sacrifice. This is why we do this. This is why we do that. Whether they're immersed students that are with us, kids ministry people, whoever it is, they know what we're about. And it's about getting everybody on side to move forward with that one mission. Because if you have disagreement and debate about that, it's not going to work. And so I meet people. The key thing is to understand that God is going to use your church. And people are going to challenge you. People aren't going to like what you do. Listen, we came up with this idea. I'll end with this because it's Norm's time. We came up with this idea of a cinema site. I think I talked about it a year or so ago. We hadn't started it yet. And it was basically doing a church in a movie theater. But not only, I was sitting there watching a terrible movie with my kids one day. Okay, this is a year and a half ago now. It was called Trolls. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It's awful. So I'm sitting watching Trolls, and by God's sovereignty, it's terrible. And so I started just fading out and saying, why don't we leverage movie theaters to do church plants? And one of the challenges was because music's kind of hard to do really well in a movie theater because it's a room built for sound and it's dry and it's so on and so forth. So we went back and I said, yeah, but what if we just put the worship in here and the preaching in here on a screen, and it just sat up there? No fade-ins, no piano hands and drummer guy, none of that, just a screen, a full screen. And everyone to the man said, not gonna work. No one's gonna go to that. Why wouldn't they just listen to the stuff on Tuesday? They're not going to go sit in a movie theater and watch worship and preaching on a screen. Everyone said that. Everyone I sit down for coffee, this is the stupidest idea. All right, it almost makes them, a purist, it almost makes them throw up. All right, people who don't like video preaching are like, now you're doing video worship? This is insane. Are you nuts? There's no one in the room. Who's in charge? So we said, let's do it. And so we did it. And we do it every week at 2 of our sites. And literally 600 of the 45 people who were at our church last week attended a site where the worship and the sermon was video. 600 people. They'll go. Now, some of them think it's real, which is awesome. The lights are so like, wow, that was great. He was on stage, right? He was 20 feet tall. Anyways, those are my random thoughts. Plant churches. Norm?